Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's so wonderful to be with you tonight. My name is Lynn Cooper. I'm the Catholic Chaplain and Associate Director of the University Chaplaincy, and welcome to the Tufts University Russell Lecture on Spiritual Life. As we join together tonight, we recognize that the land on which the Tufts community has lived and learned for over 170 years is on the traditional, unceded lands of the Massachusetts tribe. We acknowledge with gratitude the Massachusetts tribe and the Aquinnah and Mashpee Wampanoag peoples still steward this beautiful land. We acknowledge in sorrow the countless injustices yet to be repaired. And we acknowledge in solidarity that they live today by their own strength and traditions. The Russell Lecture is one of my favorite evenings of the academic year. It's a chance to gather as a community and to learn from the prophets and visionaries of our time, to be challenged by new ideas and to be nourished by wisdom across generations. It is truly a privilege to welcome you, both in person and on the live stream, to this year's Russell Lecture, featuring an evening with distinguished poet and scholar, Dr. Ofelia Zepeda. At this time, I now invite President Monaco to offer opening remarks. President Monaco has been a friend and champion of the University Chaplaincy for many years. He has supported the Russell Lecture and other signature programs and has been at the heart of a transformative growth in our multi-faith chaplaincy team. We are so grateful for your leadership as president of Tufts University these past 12 years. Thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. Good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to welcome you to this year's Russell Lecture on Spiritual Life. The Russell Lectureship is probably one of the oldest of Tufts traditions, established by James Russell in 1867, and then the first lecture occurred the year after and has occurred every year since 1868. In accordance with the provision in the donor's will, Tufts invites a distinguished lecturer to campus each year to speak on a topic related to spiritual life and the present historical moment. The University Chaplaincy hosts this event in collaboration with different offices and departments depending on the theme and how the work intersects with our academic work. This year, I'm thrilled that the chaplaincy worked together with Vernon Miller and the Indigenous Center community to invite this year's guest speaker, Native American linguist, scholar, poet, and 2021 Tufts Honorary Degree recipient, Dr. Ofelia Zepeda. Through her poetry, teaching, and scholarship, Dr. Zepeda advocates for the preservation and revitalization of indigenous languages and demonstrates how language is deeply intertwined with identity and therefore critical to the vitality of indigenous cultures. Dr. Zepeda also reveals how poetry can be a powerful tool in humanizing and deepening our understanding of the complex issues of our time, from climate change to forced displacement to the stigmatization and attempted erasure of various cultures and identities. I hope that this lecture will continue to inspire you to have a renewed appreciation for the diverse languages, cultures, and communities that strengthen us and make us unique, both within our university and in the wider world. Before I turn it over to the next portion of the event, I just want to thank the University Chaplaincy for their hard work to continue this tradition. Although our chaplain, Reverend Elise Nelson-Winger, unfortunately couldn't be here this evening, I'd like to just thank her for her continued leadership and for particularly organizing today's event. Thank you to Vernon Miller and the Indigenous Center for co-hosting the lecture. The Indigenous Center opened this year in a wonderful new addition to our 7 other identity centers, and it offers a welcoming and supporting environment and space for Indigenous students across our campuses. Under Vernon's leadership, the center is already doing outstanding work and is contributing to our efforts to build a more diverse and inclusive university for all members of the Tufts community. Finally, thank you, Dr. Zepeda. It's an honor to have you here on campus. While the COVID-19 pandemic hindered our ability to invite you to Tufts in person for the 2021 commencement ceremony, I'm so thrilled that you were able to do so today. I'm now going to turn it over to Tai Lee, class E24, who will formally introduce Dr. Zepeda. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Tylee. I'm a junior at Tufts University studying environmental engineering, and I'm an intern at the Indigenous Center, which is just celebrates 1-year anniversary just last year, so yay us. I'm also from the Nan Nation. I live on the homelands of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and I'm so excited to meet Dr. Zepeda tonight. So first, Dr. Zepeda is a 2021 Tufts Honorary Degree recipient and director of the American Indian Language Development Institute at the University of Arizona, and the Regents Professors of Linguistics of affiliated faculty in the American Indian Studies at the University of Arizona. A member of the Tohono O'odham Nation, she teaches Tohono O'odham language courses and survey courses on American Indian languages. Her research areas include language variation, language policy, and issues of endangered languages. She has published numerous articles in these areas. She's also the author of the Tohono O'odham Grammar and 2 books of poetry, much of written in the O'odham language. Dr. Zepeda is the recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship for her work on Indigenous languages. She has served on numerous boards and is currently working as a trustee on the Tohono O'odham Community College. Dr. Zepeda has been involved in the University of Arizona's American Indian Language Development Institute practically since its inception as an instructor and founding co-director. Her breadth of experience in this field of language revitalization continues to guide the institution. Tonight she will speak about how language shapes our worlds and futures and how poetry contributes to revitalization of Indigenous languages. Welcome, Dr. Zepeda.
Pergi working the butchering, Mr. Stephen Tat, with Yajira, whom you have, with my autumn with Hajodaka ear, and the Barjum chewing with your Stephen Tat, with the my autumn TV, with your half oil put ear Hajodaka. Mabakaiji, the Manico him, Tohono O'odham Hajodaka and if you go Amjid works after had the Bursit and Wurhajan. And si saba juman the nakok ya jiwa iya ya osham junik ya onye ita kakara mashjam kuduma mapi me hap oyapo jo mashjam ya chipkan. And the biarsh potem chim and ya si sapan tat with the website just ham baju with sahab inye itam kapo any wayman ya hap om junik. Yan tomo amjit pianyaritam and sk kaicho mom mom to go high chom my amjit itam and tomo. Ja, amjid junik ida da hudning. The Bible some 2 years must have a Jew with the minima ita mabaka tapper. One of Matukum Ibichaka I hit up. And the Nakokiao Jiva Yawam journey when the winner of Pin Nako. No be a game mumki that can a wow when up. Cisco couldn't a wow when up. Yeah, yes, up and that. Yeah, that homo ida dashet. So it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm very appreciative of all the welcome and the welcome environment that I've been in since I've been on campus today, and also been in the Tufts neighborhood today. I've also had a very nice experience visiting with some of your Indigenous students here at the Indigenous Center, and also to visit the center as well. And I was very impressed with the work that they do there. And of course, I did express my appreciation for the invitation to present here to you this evening, and also acknowledged my honorary degree from your university. And also, of course, I express my appreciation to the Indigenous people of Massachusetts for allowing us permission to be here on their homeland. And then, of course, finally, I bring good thoughts, good feelings from the place that I come from, which is the desert, the Sonora Desert of southern Arizona, and the Tohono O'odham Nation, my people. And anyway, so I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate you all coming in this evening to be part of the lecture. So it was, well, not too challenging, but it was very interesting for me to try and assess how I would come to the topic and the different areas that this lecture series sort of focuses on. And a big part of it, of course, is the spiritual road. And which is something that, of course, is important to many of us. And it's a road that we traveled in different ways, you know, from our own worldview, from our own understanding of what spirituality is. So hopefully, as I speak about spirituality in the way that I have chosen to, that you will be open in your mind and I'm sure understand and learn from what I have to say this evening. So in thinking about the topic, I chose a phrase for my title for this evening's talk. And in O'odham, which is my first language, and it does say exactly what it says in English there. The Ni'ok says our language. The word Ni'ok is the word for language or speech. And the other big word there is Tagawkada. It says our strength, our power, you know, that you can manifest in lots of different ways. So for many of us, we see language as being, of course, very, very important, and that it is very powerful in so many ways. Not just our language, but lots of languages have that capacity, if not all languages. And so I chose this title to come from language and to come from the different aspects that a language can hold for us. And in this evening's presentation, I'm going to be primarily talking about my language, my first language, the Tohono O'odham language. Okay, so I want to, of course, first of all, sort of position myself. For those of you who are not familiar with my people, perhaps some of you have seen the term Papago. We used to be called Papago. We're no longer called Papago, although it is still in the literature. Papago was the term given to us by outsiders. We took back our name in the 1970s. The tribe basically asked Congress if we could take back our name, our real name, and we were allowed as part of the reorganization of our tribal government. And so I just give you here just some perspective of geography, of where we're at, if you're not familiar. And as you can see, the O'odham Nation is intersected by the international boundary between the United States and Mexico. And this, of course, some of you may be familiar, had been in the news in the last several years, simply because of the previous administration's efforts to build a wall. So we were part of that mix, you know, because that wall would have cut through our traditional homelands. And you know, and if later, if there are questions specific to that, I can try and address them. But anyway, I'm just interested in showing you our homeland, which part of it is currently in the United States. The rest extends into what is Sonora, Mexico, and goes, as you can see, down to the Gulf there. And our name, as I mentioned, is Tohono O'odham. Tohono does mean desert. You can look it up in the dictionary and it'll say desert. And O'odham also, the meaning of that one word is people. It can also mean human or man. And so that is our name, Tohono O'odham, desert people. And we also, like I said, when we took back our name, our real name, it was an interesting challenge, of course, to residents in the area, non-O'odham residents, in trying to learn to pronounce our name. And as you can imagine, myself being at the university and having a high-profile situation there or position there, I had many, many phone calls and emails asking how to pronounce this name. And so we can be called Tohono O'odham or just O'odham. Anyway, so one thing that will be important in this talk this evening is, of course, the land, the landscape, you know, where the people live. And it's the land that defines us, as you can tell by our name, Tohono O'odham, desert people. You can't get any clearer than that. And of course, that particular desert, you know, it has little rain, has lots of cactus that survive well in a place with little rain, and has lots of very dry heat. Although last week we did have snow, right, which is very unusual for the desert, but it's very striking when you see snow on cactus. And everyone was outside taking pictures. Anyway, so this gives you a little perspective of the land base and the location of the people. The language itself, again, O'odham Ni'ok, the O'odham language, is part of a language family called the Udo-Aztecan language family. And as you can see by this map, I don't know if you can tell, the upper part extends into what is now the state of Idaho, and then comes down to the Great Basin, and then into the southern part of Arizona, the southwestern part of Arizona, and then into Mexico, and then further south. So the language family that O'odham belongs to is huge. Their spread is tremendous, you know, from Idaho all the way down, as shown by this map. So there are just a small number of other languages in Arizona that are related to O'odham, and some you may be more familiar with than O'odham. One of them includes the Yaqui language, which is also in Sonora and Arizona, the Hopi language, which is in northern Arizona, Paiute language, which is up on the border, the northernmost border of Arizona, and the Pima language, which is in central part of Arizona, close to the city of Phoenix. The Pima language is the closest language to Tohono O'odham. In fact, some people say it's the same language. It's a mutually intelligible language, but geographically they, you know, are apart from each other. And the Pima people, their traditional homeland, where they're still at now, had a river running through it. Of course, there's no longer a river, dried up and dammed because of irrigation and other development in the state of Arizona. And so their traditional name is Akimir O'odham, which means river people, because they did have a river. Even though they have no river now, they are, of course, still the Akimir O'odham, or river people. So anyway, so that gives you a little picture of our languages. Again, just a real quick overview. The land of Augurik is a mountain there. I have a picture of the mountain. The mountain is one of the most sacred peaks for the O'odham. And you can see that mountain from, great distances, even from Tucson on a clear day. And I give you just some figures to give you an idea of the perspective, or gives you perspective on the population itself, about 25,000 people. The reservation, the main reservation, is located about 60 miles west of the city of Tucson. And the O'odham Nation is a large expanse of land and is second in size to the Navajo Nation in northern Arizona. Primary livelihood are different service occupations, most of them federal government programs to serve, the population. Of course, health, hospitals and clinics, and the schools. So that's another employer, and different types of social and human service offices. And then, of course, like many tribes in the U.S., we also have a successful gaming industry, which currently employs some tribal members. The O'odham Nation has a tribal college, which just celebrated its 20th anniversary a couple of years ago. Has 2 high schools and 1 large K-12 public school district on the nation. And as was mentioned, I have sat on the board of trustees for the college, for the tribal college, for a number of years, and I'm currently the chair of the board of trustees. So with the language, as we'll be talking about the role of language, the role of poetry, the role of, and where spirituality fits in all of that. So I wanted to just give you a little perspective again on the language situation for the O'odham. And we are sort of a microcosm of other languages that are our size across the United States. And I have here in O'odham, the Nyok at the Noach, Shinoyapot, Kutap Mas Mawus Haichos Amichudan. We travel with our words. This is the way we understand all things. And people have always said this, that our language is our culture. The language holds so much knowledge for a community, for a tribe. So as we look at our population with regard to language, most of our speakers are older adults, grandparent age and older. Though we have, because of our population, we do have some younger adult speakers, meaning young adults in their 40s and late 30s. The younger population, people in their 20s and lower, usually don't speak the language. And these are the people who are currently our second language learners. They're learning their home language as a second language. And this is a phenomenon that, is played across the U.S. among tribal groups. Currently, the O'odham Nation, like many other tribal communities, has a language center. Many other tribes have language programs. Our language center is designed to serve the full O'odham Nation in all areas of language teaching, language research, and especially language revitalization efforts. And they're focusing on the young population, the children, working with the preschool and early childhood programs, and using the method, the language immersion method, which is having language in all contexts of a school day. So the tribe is, making direct efforts at creating new speakers, starting, like I said, with the children. And of course, we have programs for adults, teenagers, and anyone who wants to gain back the language. The way that O'odham talk about language and think about language and how we came to have language is interesting, and it's an approach that many other tribes have in common. And we hear this over and over again, that language is a gift. And for O'odham, in our traditional knowledge, in our traditional telling of where we came from and how we came to be here, it says that. It says that when we were created, when we were formed, that the Creator gave us these things. It gave us the sense of thought. It gave us, knowledge, and it gave us speech. So it was handed to you when you were created. And so in O'odham, that's what it says, and that's what I have here as well. So it is a gift, it is very special. And you'll hear other tribes also say that language is sacred. And I just want to, I'll mention it again here, that when people say language is sacred, it sets boundaries. That tribe will set certain boundaries. That is, you cannot share certain aspects of the language with outsiders. Sometimes you cannot share certain aspects of the language with certain populations within your own tribe. That is, there are certain things that children should not have access to, certain types of words and knowledge. There are certain types of language that women cannot have access to. There are certain types of knowledge that only medicine people, traditional healers have access to. If you're not one of those, you cannot use that language. So anyway, so that's what they say, that's what one of the things they mean when they talk about language being sacred. Now, what happens is when they start losing the language, when a tribe starts losing the language and they realize they're losing the language, meaning that no one is learning the language anymore, that is, especially children are not learning the language anymore, then they step back and reevaluate what is truly sacred and where the lines must be drawn. Because they have to pass this information on even though it is the most sacred. So they rethink their boundaries. And like any culture, they can make decisions about moving those lines. We do it all the time. Our cultures do it all the time. Our governments do it all the time. Move those boundaries to allow access or to close people off. In the case of language and language loss, tribes have had to move those lines, become a little bit more open so that others can learn these so that it's not all completely lost. Over the years, as I've worked with hundreds of language teachers from all over the United States, I've gotten to know speakers, language teachers, language advocates, language activists, leaders in the field of language work. And all of them are different, and they take different perspectives on their own language. And one summer, we had such a diverse group of people at our Language Institute. And I ended up writing this short poem about them. And it needs some explanation in certain parts, so I'll come back to it, but I'll just read it for you. And it's about language and people and their attitude about their own language, not someone else's language. Some have carried it, held it close, protected. Others have pulled it along like a reluctant child. Still others have waved it like a flag, a signal to others. And some have filled it with rage and dare others to come close. And there are those who find their language a burdensome shackle. They continually pick at the lock. So perhaps you might find it difficult to imagine or to think why someone would find the language a burden. When it comes to language teachers and knowledge holders, such responsibility is placed upon them that it's like telling them, what you know will save us. That's a huge burden. And some of them don't want to take it on. You know, these elders, they don't want to take it on. They say things like, well, I learned it, why can't you learn it? You know, you had an opportunity to learn it, why didn't you learn it? So they blame, you know, goes back and forth. And it's very sad to watch, but it's there. So these people who have the language, but really don't want it, that is because the community has put that responsibility on them. You have this knowledge, you must teach it, you must share it. But they don't want to. They say, it's not my responsibility. You should have learned it from your parents. You should have learned it from your grandparents. Because that's the way it had been done before. So there are these people. And there are others, of course, like I said, who hold it close and protect it. And that's great, you know. And again, these are the elders sometimes, although they don't always have to be the elders. They have a lot of knowledge, they have a lot of language skill, and they hold it and want to keep it and keep it safe, but again, they don't want to teach it. They say, I have it, I will know it, and if it goes with me when I go, that's fine. It wasn't meant to be passed on, which is a strange attitude to have, because passing on knowledge orally is always, you know, something that indigenous tribes, indigenous people have done all the time. But there's this attitude about it when it comes to language in modern day. And then, of course, there are the ones who are just angry at everyone, and they have the language. And sometimes these are the people, and many of our indigenous students, especially U.S. indigenous students, will know this and recognize this. These are the people who almost lost the language because of their boarding school experience, where it was forced and beaten out of them. And some of them, it wasn't beaten out completely. So they saved it and brought it home, but they were so angry of what was done to them because of their language. And so they choose not to pass it on. They're the ones who choose to say, I'm not going to teach my child this language because I don't want them to go through the experience that I went through. And we try to tell them, it's not going to happen again, but we can't guarantee them, you know. And so they choose not to pass it on. And like I said, they're very, very bitter and tell their story. They keep telling their story. I spoke my language and they hit me, you know. And I don't want, you know, my child, my grandchildren to go through that again. So anyway, so these are some of the personalities and attitudes that are there. And of course, we have others that have it, and they want to show everyone they have it, have the language, have the knowledge, and they say, come to me, you know, I will teach you what I know. Okay. So there's, like I said, all personalities that work on language, and it's very challenging to work with them because they are so diverse in their approaches, in their attitude about language. And we have them in the schools, you know. The ones who don't want to teach, they're in the schools as just resource people. You know, they are there for the language teacher to go to and, you know, for clarification of information or something like that. And they'll do little things like that, but they won't be in the classroom and be the teacher. They don't want that responsibility. Anyway, so that's what that, at least for me, that's what that poem is about. So, like I said, we have this diverse population. But then we also have many more who look at language as true gifts and have chosen to take on the responsibility of handling this gift. You know, because you don't take it lightly. The gift is not just a little token. It's something very, very important, very powerful. And so they choose to take it on. And so I had a chance to write about them as well. But I do want to mention that in my experience, I have seen that in language recovery efforts by different tribal communities, one of the most reoccurring requests by people who are studying their heritage language as a second language is that the reason they want to be able to speak their language is so they can pray. So they can pray in that language. And their understanding is, and I'm sure their parents or grandparents told them too, that if you pray in your language, they always say it's more meaningful, you know. Or they always say, this is the only way your Creator will understand that you are speaking to them if you pray in our language. And so when a person is learning their language as a second language, that's probably one of sort of the first assignments that they put upon themselves, you know, is to figure out how they're going to pray, what they're going to say, what the word choices will be in a prayer. And we get some very nice prayers or blessings that they produce as an assignment, you know, because you sort of have to treat it that way. And it's very rewarding, and they are very grateful for being able to do this for the first time for themselves. And so these are the people that are very open, you know. I want to pray, and I want to teach, and I want to give back what I learn and what I know from whoever is willing to give it to me. And so I wrote about, this is just an excerpt from a longer poem about these types of people. You come with pollen on your shoulders and smoke from cleansing blessings still lingering in your clothes. Your family blessed you before you traveled. They held out gifts for you, gifts of words, of stories. You come to us from people with words on their tongue. So they came from families who, you know, tried their best to promote the language in the home, but were not as successful because there are just so many distractions. You have working parents, so there's nobody home. Sometimes you have working grandparents, so that there's nobody home. So these people choose to learn their second language from somebody who's not of their family. So the family supports them in doing that. So here I want to talk about words. So words that we can move very easily to the sacred. And this is for O'odham. Maybe similar for other, you know, languages, but mine come from my language because this is what I understand. So we have a list of everyday words here for you. It kind of looks like a vocabulary list, and you might think about it that way. And these are just, like I said, words that can occur in any context, appropriate context. And so I'll just read them for you. So we have the word for rain, the noun rain, juk, which also is the same word for the verb rain, juk. Shrudak, water, howard, wind, chuak, clouds, dashtonerik, sunlight, chuat, land or earth, kachim shrudak, the ocean, vipismernyai, hummingbird song, and then I have a list of animals, baak, pan, rishak, nanakamar, eagle, coyote, hawk, bat. And then I'll share with you here a little bilingual poem. Chū te ke mo pūshanim, tō te he mo pūshanim, chuchkuhim o pim, wupagim o apahim. Greenly they emerge, whitely they emerge, in colors of black they are coming, reddening they are right here. So from the English translation, you might be able to tell what the poem is about. And this actually, the base of this particular poem is a traditional O'odham song. And the song is a song for the clouds. And all it's doing is observing the clouds and its movements and the different shades that it takes as it, moves across the sky perhaps, or else as it develops to bring a storm. And I think that's the intent of the song. It describes the clouds and its behavior in bringing rain. And the colors that are mentioned here, you try not to take so literally. There's, at least I've never really seen a green cloud. Of course, we've all seen black and white clouds. And then red clouds. Certainly in Arizona, we get a lot of red clouds by our beautiful desert sunsets. So anyway, this song is for the clouds, it's for the rain, it's for all the things that come from this particular environmental event. And rain, of course, in the desert is extremely important. So O'odham has lots of songs about rain. It's about all the elements involved with rain, including clouds, of course, the wind, water, and the ocean. And the ocean is important to us because in the summer, when our most important rains come, they come from the ocean, from that direction, and we know it. And so we acknowledge the ocean in our songs. And so these songs are the songs of the sacred. They are prayers. They are prayers and words to the clouds. They are prayers and words to the wind, to the ocean, to the heat that allows these clouds to move the way they do and develop in the way they do in order to bring rain. So that's where we find words of the sacred. They are everyday words, but once they move, once the person moves them into this context, into a song, into a prayer, into some kind of act to beseech something, to request something to happen, it's a prayer. It is a blessing for all of us. So, sacred words in unexpected places. And one of my sort of direct efforts in working with tribal communities who are doing language revitalization, including my own, we talk about words and how they can be moved, because as I said, there are some people who are very adamant about words that are typically used in ritual, in prayer. They say, you can't use it that way. You can't use it with children. You can't put it in a story for children. You can't use it for high school kids, And like I said, those lines, those boundaries have been, getting more and more relaxed over time just because of the necessity to have that language move over and have it passed on as knowledge for these upcoming speakers. So moving words of long ago, moving words that might even be sort of archaic. We're not sure what they mean anymore. And these are the words from our old traditional stories, from our songs, chant. We have chants. We also have what are called speeches. When they are produced, they sound different than regular speech. And of course, we have blessings or prayers, and all of them are oral. And so we are starting to move those, crossing that boundary to use them as part of the language for language teaching. And at the same time, like I said, people who are learning their home language as a second language, you know, they start to understand this, you know, where these words come from. And then, of course, using these words in very contemporary context, you know, and also understanding sort of the weight some of these words had prior to being moved over for language learning opportunities. So I think what we try to explain is that it's all in the context, the intent of the words. You know, so the speaker has a great deal of responsibility for those words. So I have here these lines that I put here come from different songs, different autumn songs. And I'll just read them for you. Hummingbird song surrounding me. Aupahiosik nyapichimitahim. Cottonwood blossoms surrounding me. Nyenye nyapichimitahim. Songs surrounding me. So even though they're lines from different songs, they do have something in common. Okay, and you can see they're just references to animals or different aspects of nature. And I'll go into it just a little bit more here. Pichimitahim, surrounding me. That's a very nice word. It's just an everyday word. You know, anything can surround you. You know, a building can surround us. A string of people can surround us. Okay. And so, but for O'odham, for that language, it says when something surrounds you, especially something from our environment, our natural environment, it says it's beautiful, it has aesthetics, it's pure, it's cleansing, and has a certain level of sacredness. And many of our blessings in O'odham and also for other tribes, for instance, when somebody sings a song for you, you know, they will stand near you, they will stand behind you, they will stand next to you. And you hear the song, but you also feel the song. And it's an interesting phenomenon when somebody sings for you. So anyway, all of these elements, like I said, can be represented by, you know, things in nature, and I just list some of them here for you. And also something like smoke. Many tribes use smoke, burning different types of plants, depending on where you're from and who you're from. There are different plants that you use for burning and for cleansing purposes. And then, of course, in our animals, again, part of our natural environment, we also use them. And usually, well, it can be the whole animal, you know. Sometimes it's just part of the animal, like the feathers or a wing, or else in O'odham, we understand certain animals to have certain powers. And so we use that power in our ritual and in our blessing as well. And so they're all there. And like I said, they're just ordinary words, names of animals and plants and so forth that you can use, you know, in other contexts. And then all of a sudden they can move over, and you have to, you know, sort of understand when you're doing that as a speaker, and especially if you're a second language learner of your language, because oftentimes, I mean, you don't want to make a mistake when you're doing that. So anyway, so just these elements, and also the understanding of having these things being around you. In the case of O'odham, Aupahiosik, which is a cottonwood tree when it blooms in the spring, early summer maybe, little drifts of cotton-looking fiber, drops from these trees. And when you watch it, it's beautiful to see. And apparently, if it surrounds you and it does something for you, it becomes a blessing. And the same thing when they talk about hummingbird songs. I've never heard a hummingbird sing. So I don't know what they mean when they say hummingbird song. You can talk about hummingbird because when they're near you and they're flying, you can hear the flutter of their wing. It's actually audible. But I know they make a sound, but I don't know if it's a song and if that's what they are talking about when they talk about hummingbird songs. But anyway, apparently when you experience it, it does surround you, just like a song would surround you. As very powerful element to be in. And I don't think I've ever been in that situation. So I can't tell you for sure. So poetry and language recovery, just moving words into new spaces is all that we are doing. So of course, we know that all large languages, English, French, German, Spanish, and so on, all of them have literatures, both oral and written literature. And they're important. They're an important part of the whole language inventory for those large languages. Indigenous languages also has literature. Currently, for the most part, they are still oral. So our traditional literature is passed down orally. We get opportunities to hear them at different points if you know storytellers and other types of tellers. So those opportunities can be rare, especially if you move away from your community, but you can always go back and experience those tellings and so forth. So anyway, so they are there. And what many tribal communities have been doing recently is moving them to print so that they're more widely accessible. But that's a slow process because many tribal communities, though they may have writing systems, modern writing systems, they are still not stabilized. That is, people are inconsistent about how, say, they'll spell a word, and that creates tremendous debate among writers of the language. But that's a process we are all going through as being members of a community where writing is very, very new to us. So anyway, so it's an exercise that we are experiencing right now. So moving language that are in stories has its drawbacks. And we find this especially among language teachers who work in the schools. And many tribes, not all, many tribes have restrictions on stories. And a lot of it is seasonal. That is, say for instance, for my tribe, you can tell stories in the wintertime or when the weather is cold, but when the weather changes and it's hot, you can't tell those stories anymore. And that's why many of our storytelling events are around December and January, especially in southern Arizona, because it already starts to get warm in February sometimes. So you have to watch that kind of calendar. So they're seasonal. So you just can't have, especially if they're in print, you can't have them on the bookshelf for children to look at. So that is an unusual restriction placed on printed traditional stories. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, there are some stories that are relegated to only certain populations. And songs, the same thing. There are songs that belong to certain families. There are songs that belong to certain, in our case, villages, and that you can't share them if you're not of that village. That is, you can't allow outsiders to learn a song from one village. Anyway, so that gets language teachers in trouble sometimes. So anyway, so over time we've been learning, how to cope with these types of cultural restrictions and guidelines that have always been there. But with school schedules and curriculum, it's a whole different kind of issue. So we've been managing it over time. So anyway, so we've been creating new literature that is not restricted to seasonal calendars. So that's one way to avoid, that issue. And then, of course, in creating new literature, we open it up to many more people, either from the tribal community, and also to the older people who may have forgotten some of these stories. They're very eager to go back to them. And then, of course, to much wider audiences, meaning audiences that are outside of a particular tribe. Because then you can buy, some book, in a bookstore about the stories about a tribe, and, if they chose to make that work accessible. So anyway, so it's all a whole new context, and it's all supporting language revitalization first, and then of course it's supporting just knowledge to the wider population about distinct tribal communities. And I see it, as a way of our language evolving. Of course, it's a way that language is changing because we're very deliberate in making some of these choices. And we know it, that this is what we're doing. And we're very conscious of the potential impact in the future, and how we are documenting ourselves about what we are doing with the language. But I think that even before languages were written, speakers made similar choices about changes in how to say something, how to use a particular word for a new context. And they would have had to have done that. Otherwise, the language would have stifled and died, not developed. Language must change, must adapt in order to survive, and that's all we're doing. Sometimes I say that so that I can give credence to what I do. It's part of my job. But anyway, that's sort of the conclusions that I come up with for myself. So anyway, so many of these, things that we're doing, like I said, very consciously, and sometimes with a good plan, sometimes with not such a good plan, is moving language into these new spaces for the benefit of language learners and potential language learners. And we do get criticisms. Our own tribal members are our most severe critics. They ask us why, and we try and explain to them. Sometimes they come around, other times they don't. So it's been an interesting experience, and probably a very interesting sort of battle to be in, to maintain a language, to revive a language by making decisions about what this language is going to look like for the coming speakers. So it's like an interesting life so far. So anyway, so poetry is part of that whole literature. And, I mentioned it only because that's how I've been contributing to the literature, is through my poetry that I've been writing in my first language. And so poetry is a safe way, I think, for language learners to access, the language. So they not only access words and vocabulary and so forth, they also access, sort of certain cultural knowledge, traditional knowledge that is held in the language and in some of the themes that I have written about over time. And so this access through poetry is very, very safe, because it's there in the public. And young people gravitate to it in different ways. And for some, It's the first time that they've heard the language spoken when I do a reading in O'odham, and then they become curious and they want to read what I have written. And so, they become students of the language and second language learners for the rest of their lives. So it's been very interesting process when they use poetry to access language. So I want to offer, as part of a conclusion, what I just said about allowing access as part of language revitalization, as part of course, helping to produce second language learners, and also assisting these second language learners to access the knowledge of their people, their family, their community, whatever the case might be. So in my poetry, I know that I write about, of course, the traditional knowledge that I have, that I learned from my parents and the people that they come from. But I also know, again, about those boundaries that I mentioned earlier. And then there are other boundaries as well. And I know when not to go beyond those boundaries. And, those boundaries are the type that I can't really explain to you, but I just have a feeling, that I can't go there. And so I don't. And so the cultural content that I might allude to or make reference to in a poem is very on the surface, but it's enough to get someone's interest ignited so that they can ask their own family, what does this mean? Why, what is she talking about when she said this? So anyway, so I have that cultural knowledge, and like I said, I build it into some of the poems and make it available. I have historical knowledge, again, traditional historical knowledge that I might build into a poem. And again, it's only a very surface level. And again, it might, encourage someone to ask questions of their own family, their own community. They shouldn't be asking me. I'm not their family. I'm not their community. And of course, the words are there. And the words are there from me and the way I speak, the way I learned the language. And surprisingly, there are other people that don't speak like I do, because we come from different parts of the O'odham nation. And we have variation just like in any language. And we have dialect differences, and which is a good thing to still have dialect differences. And so a student can access words through me, but then we'll say, you need to check with your family if they say it this way too. If they don't, then you learn how your parents say these words. And then, then you'll know two forms, mine and your parents. Anyway, so there's lots of sort of teaching things that can happen because of, poetry written in the language. And so I've been very blessed that this has happened. It was not my intent, not my deliberate intent, because I was writing when the language was still spoken. It was very vibrant, across the whole O'odham nation. But now, 20 years later, 30 years later, it's not the same anymore. And so these language learners gravitate to these poems, again, like I said, because they're accessible. They can buy the book and see the language and try and read and teach themselves something. And basically, that's how I learned to read O'odham, because I found it in print in a bookstore. And I always tell people, I found this book and my language was in it. And I just thought that, well, I speak this language, I should be able to read this language. But it doesn't work that way. someone has to teach you how to read. Anyway, so someone did teach me how to read. So anyway, so same thing, it was accessible. And so my work is very, very accessible to my own community members, and how they, choose to use it, is up to them. And for many, it was an entryway to language learning. So I like to read this little poem for you that is a bilingual poem. So I'll read the O'odham piece first, and then the second page has the English version of it. And it's called Nyanya Hashagit. And again, Hashagit is reference again to be in the midst of or in between of, in this case, songs. So again, to be surrounded with song, which is, for O'odham, it is heaven. It is the best place that you can be. It's the best thing for you to always be surrounded by a song, whether in your own mind or in actuality. So it's a very good thing. Nyanya Hashagit. Haka achakinyanya imo amkaidakim tashudnikawi, amkaidakim si arik tagyo, amkaidakim jupin tagyo, amkaidakim wakorim tagyo, amachaichukit shagit mo amkaidakim. Saptaha dagok tibadak, sapuok chuktodak, sapuok tujuudaka, skugit o nyanik inyait, sajuchpik o nyanik inyait. Ka achuk kachum shudak tamiabat, ka achuk achukos tamiabat, ka achuk skug hur tamiabat, ka achuk skug nyanyai tamiabat, ka achuk skug nyanyai ai. In the midst of songs, we hear the songs resounding. They are resounding toward the sunset. They are resounding toward the sunrise. They are resounding toward the north. They are resounding toward the south. We are in the midst of songs. Our heart is full of joy. Our mind is good. Our land is good. The land is all beautiful. Take a look. There is a light rain all around. Take a look. We hear the ocean in the distance. It has come near us. We hear the beautiful wind in the distance. It has come near us. We hear the dust storm in the distance. It has come near us. We hear a beautiful song in the distance. It has come near us. We hear a beautiful song in the distance. It has come upon us. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our show. I've always wanted to lead a talk show, so this is interesting. So for the last portion of tonight's lecture, we're going to have a Q&A. So there is going to be an individual walking around with a microphone. So if you have a question, if you look to your left or your right in the middle aisle, you'll see somebody with their hand in the air. That is the microphone. So if you have a question, please just kind of raise your hand and we will come to you. And so I will start off the questions for you until we get some interest. And so the lecture is on spirituality and life and leadership. And I definitely took away from this reflecting on my language, my experiences, and how that is derived in my spirituality and how that is a way of life that we have. And so it really allowed me to ponder, my relationship to my language, because you shared earlier how the federal policy through boarding schools was to eliminate the languages, so you can eliminate that identity that holds within us as Indigenous people. And so I really was I wanted to talk to you and greet you in my language, but I know because we're live stream, someone back home would hear me talk and they would already say, you said that word wrong. So I'm not going to do that, so I don't misrepresent my language. But I guess the first question I'll ask in starting us off is in your journey with your language and with the work that you do with the students at the University of Arizona, what has been the response from the Indigenous students about, reclaiming that language and reclaiming that way of life? That because when non-Indigenous people look at Native people, they kind of see this kind of pan version or pan-Indigenous version of Native people. But what distinctly sets us apart is the language. And through that language comes songs, comes the opportunity to have prayers, comes the opportunity to really hold on to those lessons that our ancestors sacrificed for us to have. So for my question is in the work that you do with the students, what has been your experience in helping them on their journeys and helping them, especially the students that are here, who want to reclaim that part of their identities that was lost, unfortunately, to other experiences in their life? I guess what has been your experiences with helping those students in your setting, and what advice would you give to students who want to reclaim their language and seeking out? Because like I said, some languages are lost already. And my tribal community, before the pandemic, we had in the teens. Today we have within one handful left people that speak our language. And so I know other students have similar experiences. And so with that, I'll rephrase the question. What experiences have you had with students at the University of Arizona wanting to reclaim their language and want to reclaim that part of their life that they've been wanting to and yearning for? And additionally, what advice would you give them as they want to go on that journey to reclaim that part of their identity too?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Vernon. As was mentioned, I do teach my language in a course at the university. So of course I get young people in the class, and many of them. Well, I'll get a mix. I'll get people from my tribe and then non-native people, and then people from other tribes, who just want to study the language. But I think, as we do in classes, first beginning of the semester, go around the room, people, introduce themselves, who they are, where they're from. And I always ask them why they're in the language class, because it's, not a common language, not like Navajo. We also offer Navajo, and they get a bigger group than I do. That's okay. But for the young Native people, especially the people from my own tribe who come to that class, they'll often say they want to learn the language or learn something about the language so that they can, hopefully understand what their grandmother or their grandparent is saying to them. And that's a very common thing, especially in the Southwest. You still have families where that generation is, the grandparent generation still has the language. So that's a very common reason for young people to want to learn the language. And it's I think a very difficult choice to make when somebody decides they want to study their own language or learn how to speak their language, because it's a huge commitment, because it's, very challenging to study a language, and especially your own. So that's the first step, deciding you want to do it, and then to do it. And oftentimes you can start with your own family, even if you're talking about the language in English, that's fine. You're just showing a curiosity about the language. And then just showing a curiosity about certain words that that are very common for many languages. People who are non-speakers of their own language, they have a set of vocabulary that they know. Like for us, they know a phrase like, let's eat, or they know names of certain foods because they're very common foods. And so they'll use them in their vocabulary. They'll shift, they'll be talking in English, and all of a sudden they'll go to an O'odham word. A lot of young people do that all the time. So they have access to the language in different ways, but wanting to learn the language is having a lot more access and somebody to be able to teach them. And so, like I said, first of all, just making that decision and then deciding you're going to make that commitment, because a lot of times you can study the language in a university or a college, maybe your tribal college. Most tribal colleges offer the language of, the tribe. But still, sometimes it's not enough if it's not there in the home, So anyway, so just making that conscious choice, to access the language either through your own family or through some, institution. And then other times people have self-taught from the documents that exist. And there's some languages that are very well documented. And then, of course, more recently, there are many languages that are online. So for many languages, there is access, not like the way, when I was looking at my own language. So there's a lot more opportunities, but I think the hard part, especially for a young person, is to make that decision, because it is a scary one, because it's not just a decision, I'm going to learn how to speak Spanish. It's not the same thing, because if you're going to learn to speak that native language, it's not just the words. It's so much more that you become responsible for if you're going to become a speaker. So that's what young people are afraid of. Because my grandma knows how to speak the language, but she also knows all these other things, that she talks about. And so, so that's a huge, thing that you're asking for. But it can be taught, in sort of increments. Not all of it's going to be dumped on you. It doesn't work that way. And then a lot of times, young people here, there's a lot of things that people won't really tell them until much later when you have maturity in different ways. You get different types of knowledge, different types of words. So it's a slow process. And so the big part is making a decision and then committing to it. And there have been instances where young adults have learned their heritage language in then 5 years, but they took that commitment. So, it's a lot, but it can happen. Yeah, thanks.
We have a question in the audience.
Hi. Oh, okay. Hi. Thank you for coming. I appreciate you a lot. My question is regarding, you spoke about the survivors of residential schools and the sense of fear that comes with asking them to teach the language. And I can imagine that the sense of fear travels through the community and through generations. And so within your language revitalization work, how do you reconcile that very real threat of brutal settler colonial violence reoccurring with revitalizing the language? Is there a strategy at work? Is a strategy to just let things be, or is there a strategy of coding the language with also a sense of resilience and resistance?
Yeah, so we're reading the question just because of the hearing. The question was, and you spoke about, the experiences that, communities have had with governmental policies to use residential schools and boarding schools as a mechanism to eliminate that part of their identity, to further be able to eliminate that existence so that they can conform and assimilate into the more dominant settler colonial, experience that they want. And so the question is how do you take the language for those, who are going through that, where that generation, because of that trauma that was given to them and forced upon them, and they don't want to, transfer that trauma down to other generations. So they were reaffirming that experience that you were sharing about why the language is often lost through that specific generation, through that era, that termination era that the U.S. government had here in this country, but it's also very prevalent still today, currently. And so I think what the student was, drawing from some of the experiences that they're having too. So in terms of language, how there's resiliency in that language, what advice or what can you relay or share with the community here about how to, through find that strength that they may need by reclaiming it, and also just acknowledging that was a part of our history that we oftentimes aren't taught. And the reality is a lot of people in this room didn't understand that was a governmental policy. And it's also not just here in this country, but it's also happening today in other communities. And so that was kind of the question of finding that resilience. How can language become a strength, for those that want to reclaim it and hold on to it? And how do they do that when there are policies today and of the past that try to eliminate that?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important question and something to think about. I don't know that there's any good answers or response, but I'll speak from what I have seen happen among tribal communities as they, first of all, to acknowledge that their language is in a situation where loss is occurring, and it'll continue to occur unless they do something. So first of all, they have to acknowledge that especially in the 1990s, when this sort of modern day observation of language loss and language endangerment among indigenous languages, especially in the United States, sort of really became real. We talked about it for the first time. And so it's just acknowledging that it is happening. And also trying to understand what happens if you do nothing, what happens if you do something. And then what do we do? I don't know if I was fortunate, but I was part of that whole experience. That is because of the work that I do. I worked with a number of tribal communities who were at that point, where they only had a handful of speakers. Meaning, what do we do? Do we just let it go? Because there's only 5 of them, and they're all over 70 years old. We can't put those 70-year-old people in the classroom with 7 and 8-year-olds. They're going to kill each other, And people attempted that. You put a 60-year-old teacher or language teacher in the classroom, it was disaster. So we didn't know how to direct, people that had to do something, and we figured it out together. So with regard to, acknowledging the situation of your language and accepting it, was number one. When that happened, and it still happens today, people gather and they give testimony about their own language, and inevitably, people just cry. There was nothing else they could do but cry. Cry for the language, for themselves, for their past, because their past is what put them here. Not just their own people's past, but the past, in this case, of being part of American history. And a lot of it was not our fault. So they couldn't do anything but cry. And everybody in that circle knew what the crying was for. So they would get that out. And it's all that, trauma, historic trauma, all of that, It all just came, and it was all because of the language. And like I said, I don't know how else they could have initially dealt with trying to talk about, this is where we are with this language. And for some, they could say, this is how we got here, and understand it. And after some time, sometimes a year or more, then they decide or talk about what do we do. And then they would cry again because it's like it's too big of a task. The language moved over years, hundreds of years to get to this point, and now it's almost gone. How in the world are we going to ever fix it or do something about it? And it's just overwhelming. Just too overwhelming for a human being. And then you sort of like, those of us as language teachers would sort of like chunk it up. You don't have to do it all at once. And this one person can't do it by themselves. It's going to take a team of people with different types of expertise. And you must use all the resources that you can find that's accessible to you to help you. You know, you must be willing to take on outsiders who will help you. Just, you know, you have to be that open. You have to build up this, you know, infrastructure, which again is totally artificial for language teaching. Just not real, but that's where we were. And so, like I said, just do it in steps. You know. And those, you know, kinds of talks were realistic, you know, because it's teaching. You know, you can't, you know, everybody goes kindergarten, first grade, second grade. That was it, you know, but it was for language. And so you had to make it manageable, realistic, and of course, interesting and fun, you know. So it was a process, and you just had to, like I said, go through those steps. And there are people that are still going through that now, facing those realities, acknowledging them, accepting them, suffering a lot of pain, a lot of guilt because of them, you know, what the language was taken through, and acknowledging what has already been lost. You know, that's the saddest part, and that you can't bring it back, you know. And but like I said, it is a process. It's, you know, it's this anger, grieving, and then acceptance, you know, just like with any traumatic experience that a body might go through. And that's what has been happening with language. And it's worked for some it hasn't worked as well, but that's where we are right now. So thank you for your question.
We'll take a final question to close tonight's convening. We have a question right up here.
Hi, I just want to thank you so much for your beautiful words and wisdom tonight, but I was a little curious about your poetry process, especially because O'odham isn't like a, you know, traditionally a written language, so I was wondering, when you do write poetry in your native language, what comes first to you? Like, do you sort of hear those words sort of like surrounded by them, and then writing them as sort of like a second part of that? And like, yeah, so I was curious about that process, and if it's different whether when you write it in English and when you write it in your native language.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, writing in my first language, sometimes it's very similar to the way I write in English, other times it's not. I found that when I first was writing in O'odham, I was using the template, the pattern of traditional O'odham songs. Our songs are very short, but they have lots of repetition, and that makes them long. There are very few words in them. They don't rhyme. They're very heavily metaphoric. So that's where the content is really packed in, or meaning, you know, is packed in that. And so when I understood songs, I found I could write some poems that were similar to that in O'odham. So I only wrote in O'odham when I first started writing, because I was just writing for myself. I wasn't I think I'd have an audience, not even an O'odham audience, because it was very new and I was just sort of playing with language, basically. But when I translated or when I rewrote those things in English, then the audience grew because I had more English readers than I did O'odham readers. So I know that I did do that very deliberately. I copied the pattern and the format of traditional songs. So I know I have some that are like that. But then what I also found was that I had very deep memories of things that people said, especially my parents and other older people around me as I was growing up. And I found myself pulling these O'odham phrases from my memory, from my childhood, basically, what my mother used to say, what my father would say. And those phrases would end up in my writing, just as they said them, and they would build a poem, a story, or something like that. So I know that happened as well. I feel that, when I write in O'odham, it happens in O'odham first. I think about it, I find the words, I try out words, see what sounds good, work well together and so forth. And I'll produce it all in O'odham. And then I don't know what it is, but somehow I decide whether it's also going to be in English. And I feel that I do not translate myself. What I do is I write another version, a version of the O'odham poem in English. So they're not exactly the same, And in fact, O'odham readers will say, when I read the O'odham piece and then they look at the English and they know, they say, oh, these words are not the same. I say, yeah, I know they're not. It's not a translation. That was not the purpose. This is an English poem that I created. They just happen to have the same theme, across. And because I know translation, because people have asked me to translate, and that's what they want. So I know that's not what I'm doing. So it's a very interesting process, something that I created for myself, and so far it's been working. But it's the same, like writing in English. I do edit, I know when something sounds good or is going to sound good to the hearer, the audience, flows well, that carries the meaning that I want, has the rhythm that I want or the pattern that I want that works for the language. And so I base my decisions on that sensibility that I have for the rhythms and patterns and sounds of my language, and can make those judgments. And of course the same for English, even though it is my second language, I read other native poets who write only in English. And I sort of, mimicked their style for a while when I was first starting, and then kind of drifted from that and created my own. So, but it's been a bit of a journey. And I'm not a trained writer, I'm over in linguistics, which is a different world from creative writing and literature. So, so I'm just self-taught. Thank you for your question.
Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you especially to the chaplaincy for allowing the Russell Lecture to be indigenized in this way and to provide an opportunity for us to be in community and center indigeneity, center our experiences through our spirituality, through how we derive our strength from our languages. And so I want to thank you all for coming this evening. Thank Ofelia especially for blessings that she has brought today through her lessons, through her words, and through the opportunity just to be in community with us here today at Tufts. And so on behalf of the Tufts University community, and we want to thank you, and this will conclude tonight's evening. And we have one more item that Preeta is going to go ahead and bring to us. So thank you. Let's just join us each other. A round of applause.
So I have the joy of giving the closing words and directing you to what's next. My name is Prita Banerjee. I'm the Hindu chaplain. And first, let me thank all of you on live stream and in the audience, our dear guests, Dr. Zepeda, Vernon, thank you so much for organizing this, all the student leaders, and Lindsay Chu in the back, who has been amazing. A huge round of applause. So as we move to close tonight's inspirational evening, I wanted to remind you of Dr. Zepeda's work in preserving language and culture that became the Native American Languages Act of 1990, one of the many things that has happened. And this gave official status to Native language and tribal government business and has a ripple effect, as we've heard of tonight, in supporting language activists working to revitalize and support Indigenous languages throughout the world. We here at Tufts met a week ago to honor this work in our own languages and voice at an open mic entitled Our Language, Our Strength. And through poetry, song, story, we explored the essential role of language in our life journeys. As a takeaway of the deeply moving night, which I want to integrate into today and leave you to move forward into the future, I turn to Dr. Zepeda's words from Birth Witness, written in 2008. My parents are illiterate in the English language. They speak a language much too civil for writing. It is a language useful for pulling memory from the depths of the earth. It is a language useful for praying with the earth and sky. May we all learn to use our language, whether English, Indigenous, or otherwise, to communicate and connect to each other, to inspire our life journeys as Dr. Zepeda has done today, to pray and to remember. And in this light, we invite you to an open reception and tomorrow's workshop. So Wednesday, 11 to 1, we will be here in Breed, and lunch is included. If you haven't already signed up, please sign up at the registration desk. Lindsay's sitting back there. And please enjoy this time for conversation in the reception and connecting. Dr. Zepeda's books are for sale, and we hope you will purchase them and continue this journey with us. Thank you.